Coming up, on this week's episode of TechSNAP, cPanel's help desk was recently compromised, exposing the root passwords for many of their customers. Plus, a bad day at Zendesk led to a lot of headaches at Twitter and a bunch of other popular sites. Then we'll debate if we're really living in a post-crypto world, answer a big batch of your questions, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 99 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on February 28th, 2013, and this episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com. I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on, and the live stream is powered by the incredible ScaleEngine.com, which you've just got to go check out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the teacher, and the tech, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey.
Hey, Alan, guess what? It's going to be our 99th big show right here today. The show is so big that you were typing right up until the moment I said, hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP on the show notes. You were in there working the last minute, and there's been so many stories, we were actually going to hold a couple because we couldn't fit them all into the show, which we've never really reached that point. But this week, we're holding some of our stories, and that actually works out really great because next week, Alan and I are shooting episode 100 and episode 101 back-to-back on Thursday. So we want to extend an invitation to you to join us at our regular time on Thursday next week, and then stick around for 2 episodes back-to-back, and we're going to do a lot of extra Q&A, so we'd love to have a good rockin' chat room. And so just to reiterate, we are live on Thursdays over jblive.tv at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is 4 p.m.
Eastern and 2100 UTC.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I never get the UTC part right. And so we'd love to have you join us for 2 shows back-to-back, and we've got some great stories that we already know we're going to talk about, plus what already breaks. So I think it's going to be a couple of great episodes, not to mention we'll celebrate our 100th episode. So we'd love to have you there. All right, Alan. Well, we've got some work to get into here, so why don't we start with our first story, which is a little bit of bad news out of Zendesk, right?
Yes. So Zendesk, which is a software as a service, they provide like a ticket system, knowledge-based help desk thing for a monthly fee.
Yeah.
Their servers have been compromised, and it's affected the end users of a lot of their customers, which include Twitter, Tumblr, and Pinterest. So if you've contacted Twitter, Tumblr, or Pinterest support, you will likely have gotten an email from them apologizing for the fact that your email address has been exposed to the attackers. So like I said, Zendesk is quite popular and is used by a number of large online services. On top of Twitter, Tumblr, and Pinterest, there's also Vodafone, 20th Century Fox, the Denver Broncos, Elance, Fiverr, Gawker, Groupon.
Wow.
The New Zealand Post, Rackspace Cloud, Scribe, which is the online slideshow sharing thing.
Yeah.
Sears Canada, Sony Music, Xerox, and Usendit.
Holy crap.
And a bunch of other companies you've never heard of, or maybe you've heard of, but I haven't.
Yeah.
Zendesk's blog post says that they believe that only 3 of their customers were affected by the compromise, those being Twitter, Tumblr, and Pinterest. They didn't actually say in their blog post who it was, but based on what we hear in other places and which users got emails telling them that they support information had been compromised, it seems... So it seems Zendesk might have had separate servers for their big clients like Twitter, Tumblr, and Pinterest, and that the attackers may have gone specifically after those or something.
Right. Or maybe they, a lot of times when you have one-off systems like that, maybe they're not running the latest version of something because they're sort of been stabilized for your enterprise customers. So
you don't want to break Twitter support, so you don't do that one update. And
right, exactly. Yeah, so there may be a little lower hanging fruit too because of that. So any major compromises that we know of, like anything like user-wise stolen?
Apparently, the attackers got access to a database that has the email addresses of the users who contacted the Zendesk customers, like Twitter, for support. So the database they got has the email address and the email subject line, but apparently not the body of the email.
Wired did a great write-up on this.
Yes. It's at the bottom there. Now, a help desk is likely to contain a lot of sensitive information, especially if you have help desk for billing stuff.
Yeah.
People asking about, maybe Twitter doesn't have that so much, but maybe they, what kind of people contact Twitter for support? Probably mostly the people that buy advertising from Twitter. With less so than a regular Twitter user, I would imagine, right? But it also could have stuff like password resets, and stuff. Like, if you get to the point where you're contacting Twitter support, there might be sensitive information going back and forth in those emails.
Right.
But it also could contain API keys for, if you were, say, you were having trouble with, what was it, CoTweeter or what's the other one? Hootsuite.
Yeah.
Maybe Hootsuite is talking with Twitter people to sort out an issue, and,
this is the API key we're
keys,
using.
Yeah, and going back and forth that if you got access to that would give you access to stuff you're not supposed to have or something.
Right.
Vulnerability disclosures, right? Somebody found a bug in Twitter that allowed them to access somebody else's account. They report that to Twitter, but Twitter's help desk is compromised, and now that report is in the wild. That's why, when a company like Security Explorations tells Oracle about a vulnerability, they send an encrypted message and then have to wait for Oracle to reply, say we were able to decrypt the message and actually read it. Because they always send if you use the PayPal bug bounty program, the messages have to be encrypted so that if somebody did get it, they wouldn't be able to read it.
So PayPal is worried about the email being intercepted with the information.
Well, it's more just it's the common practice for the high security places to use PKI for their email.
Right.
But it also means that they can prove who the email came from and so on.
It should be used more.
But also, internal comments, right? If you're Twitter and, when you close a ticket, sometimes there's internal comments you put on the ticket.
Oh, the bonehead used the wrong password again. William Shatner, such a clown! ! Yeah.
Stuff like that, and you probably don't want those getting out there.
Right.
So that, this raises the question, should everybody not use software as a service and have their own self-hosted help desk application? Because Scale Engine recently switched. We were originally with BTIL, which is an online ITIL SaaS thing.
Okay.
It was okay. We didn't like it that much. And then it got bought by Citrix.
And they merged it into their GoToAssist or whatever packages they have.
Exactly. And we were like, well, the thing we've always wanted from a help desk was our ability to answer tickets directly from our email, and Beetle didn't actually do that.
Yeah.
And it caused problems because users would reply to the support address instead of to the special per ticket address that Beetle was based on.
Yeah.
Which would cause them to end up creating a new ticket.
Yeah.
And then we'd end up, with 20 tickets for one problem and stuff. So anyway, we switched to RT, which is this little Perl-based thing it's been around forever and it's quite stable and we love it.
Stands for request ticket. Tracker, right. Yeah. I don't know. So there is some logic about, avoiding software as a service, because if they have a vulnerability, you are exposed. But I maintain at the same time, in your case, Alan, you're unique because your core competency is hosting web applications. Right. So you've got that down.
Yeah. So my point here was that, if you're self-hosting and you have vulnerable software, it could leave you just as exposed, if not more. So the question comes down, do you trust the third party to do a better job of protecting your customers and their data than you?
Yeah, and you got to be really honest with yourself.
Yeah, sometimes it is better. If you're just, running a little 1 or 2 man operation that sells something and doesn't really have a focus with dealing with web apps and managing the servers, maybe it's better to let Zendesk do it.
Right.
But then again, if you're Twitter and you have your own internal security team and stuff, maybe you really should be doing it yourself.
Mm-hmm. Wise words, Alan, wise words. And it's hard. I think people hear that, but they don't actually realize. I think there's a little ego that gets in there sometimes, especially with technologically inclined people like myself, where, if I wanted to, I could often host a lot of the things that I pay for on Jupiter Broadcasting. Like there's a lot of service. Ange and I were just doing our taxes, and we were going over all of the monthly expenses I now have just to run Jupiter Broadcasting. And some of those, I've elected to do that instead of doing it myself. And it's because I want to focus on the shows and focus on the infrastructure here. And, in some cases, like we use FreshBooks, for example, for our billing, right? That's just because it's easier, even though we have to spend a little extra money for that. It lets me, I just hate billing. So it lets me focus on making shows.
Even if you have the capability to manage the help desk software yourself, if you're so busy that you never get around to updating it and stuff,
then
you're doing a bad job, and maybe you would be better off having someone else do it.
Malpractice. Yeah. Interesting, though, because then they all, but that is the flip side, is one vulnerability bites us all, right? Mm-hmm. So and that's what, I worry about a lot of these things.
Yeah, it comes down to what's called a class break. But if everybody was using, most places that aren't using Zendesk are using one of like 3 other help desk software. like Kayako, OTRS, or RT.
Yeah.
And so if there's a vulnerability in one of those, just as many people probably end up getting compromised.
Yeah. Just like when there's, I mean, this argument you could extend forever, because then you could break it down to PHP, you could break it down to Apache and, Linux kernel. I mean, you could just keep going down the stack, but yeah.
Right. And so, it's interesting in this case that Zendesk only these 3 customers were compromised. Because
I think if
it wasn't for that, Zendesk, that'd be like 10,000 companies or something like that.
Right, I think
there's a lot of people that use Zendesk.
They probably had their big customers isolated, and that's not uncommon. That's a normal practice, so that makes sense.
And maybe specifically, maybe sometime in the past, they did some update to their software and broke a functionality or something and caused Twitter to be grumpy with them.
That's usually how that comes about.
Or just preemptively avoiding things like that. And so. We don't know the whole story, but it definitely seems like that's what happened.
Yeah. All right. Well, now there's a story that's sort of related to this, right? Am I correct?
The second half of the story is related, yes.
Okay. All right. Fill me in. What's going on here?
So the ISC of the SANS Institute, which is internet security stuff, they on their blog they have a story about a new Sshd Rootkit that's been seen in the wild now. So it's a non-kernel rootkit that actually targets the SSH server, although it actually it's not replacing your SSH server binary with a new one like a lot of rootkits have in the past.
Right.
This one's targeting libkeyutils, which is a utility that deals with the public-private keys and so on. So that when there's an update to SSHD, the compromised binary is not going to get overwritten. Right? Normally, every time Red Hat pushes a newer version of OpenSSH, or fixes a vulnerability or whatever, it was erasing or overwriting the compromised binary.
Right. Yeah.
So they're targeting this library that gets linked into SSHD that gets updated less often than SSHD itself,
which might fool a lot of standard rootkit checkers because they're probably checking the actual binary.
I get. Yeah. It became a common practice of mine quite a while ago to make the SSHD binary itself immutable, except for when I'm doing upgrades.
Right.
To prevent things like that. But in this case, it's targeting something else.
Now I see why this has been getting some play, because I thought this was, when I saw this headline, I thought, we've talked about this.
Well,
this is a little trickier, though.
Yeah, but the bigger story, though, is right now that this is happening quite a bit in the wild, and nobody's figured out what the original attack vector is yet. How they're getting access to your system to change libkeyutils.
It is interesting, though, because it does seem to primarily affect Red Hat and RPM-based distros. So
that might just be because that's what the attacker was after originally.
I just think it's funny because you could make a Linux incompatibility joke here where the malware, not even the malware authors can write malware for all the...
It's all right.
Yeah, again, that was an easy joke, so I'm sorry.
Yes. But yeah, so it's not clear what the original attack vector is, so how people are, or how the attackers are compromising the system in the first place to install the rootkit.
Right.
But it seems specifically to be targeting Red Hat and other RPM-based distros like Fedora and so on. Although we don't know if that's just because if that means that the original attack vector is only in Red Hat-based distros in CentOS, or if it's just that the particular way the rootkit installs itself is to attack the file location where the RPM is, or what.
Oh, good news. Looks like they've written a ClamAV signature, or Unspawn has written a ClamAV signature. So if you've got ClamAV on your Red Hat box, or just yum install that sucker and get ClamAV on there scanning your machine if you're worried about it.
So the rootkit does a number of things, but one of the things it does is allow the attacker to connect to SSHD and issue certain commands or log in with a password. But the commands can return the version of the vulnerability, but also basically a list of all of the credentials that have successfully been used to log into that box.
So you know which ones to go after.
After they compromise your SSHD, every user that logs in after that, their username and password is being saved. But on top of that, it's also being sent to a random domain name that's different every day. So they have an algorithm that looks for, a certain .info domain that's not going to exist today, but will next week.
Man, if that guy needs a discount on domain names, he should watch TechSNAP, right? Because that guy's buying a lot of domains.
Right. So yeah, and then if that domain doesn't exist because the guy didn't get around to creating it or whatever, then there's a hard-coded IP address that it sends the information to.
Oh, that's
But the idea is
interesting.
that all of these SSHDs are going to connect to a different random site each day and send all the username and passwords that they've captured. Part of the idea with using a random domain name each day instead of a specific one is that it's harder for an intrusion detection system to catch on to that.
Yeah, right. It's interesting. So they don't know how it's not like they're seeing this get spread around a lot, but it seems to be like targeted compromises then? Is that kind of what you're inferring?
Not necessarily. There's a lot of instances of people saying that they've seen it or gotten it, but there's no clear pattern yet.
All right.
But yeah, nobody's figured out how they're originally getting in to install it. Just that, hey, my system seems to actually have this rootkit all of a sudden. And as part of that, one of the places that reported getting compromised was cPanel. They make a control panel for web hosting that is extremely popular. It's definitely the most popular, and I think compared to like Plesk and DirectAdmin, it's a huge share of the market.
Yeah.
Well, the servers that got compromised there were their support servers, specifically like their help desk. Seemingly via this SSH rootkit. But the thing is that in addition to what you would regularly expect to find in various control panels, in various help desks, the cPanel support system needs the IP address and root credentials of a server from each customer so that the support people can log into that server and look at the issue and try to fix it. Right? If you have cPanel installed and you're having a problem with it, and you go to cPanel support because you're paying them, they're like, all right, we need your server IP address, the root username and password so we can log into it. So their help desk has all the credentials to take over your server.
Right.
And people are like, well, why don't they just hash your password or whatever? Well, you can't do that in this case, right? The credentials have to be stored in some format. They can be returned to plain text. Because in order to log into a machine, I need to know the original password, not just the hash of it. Right? Because the support staff need the password to log in. So encrypting the password might be an option. Normally, you wouldn't encrypt a password because that means it could be decrypted. That's why we normally use hashing. It allows us to compare an attempt to the saved password without ever knowing what the saved password was. But in this case, we need to know what the original password is. So they could use encryption, but then there's either a password or a key to decrypt that, and every support agent would have to have that.
Yeah.
So either you have a key management nightmare because every employee has to have this key, and every time someone leaves, you would have to change the keys. And
sort of like, we don't know, but sort of like it sounded like the Dropbox scenario was to an extent, where there was one master key.
Yes, there is one master key there.
Yeah. That's scary a little bit.
Or the system itself, their software or something, would have to have the decryption key and just decrypt the password when an authorized agent was accessing it. But that would mean that the server that was compromised would have the decryption key. So it's not providing that much. It's an extra layer, but it's almost just obfuscation at that point when the key and the encryption are sitting in the same place. So many cPanel customers started to report that their servers were being compromised after they had contacted cPanel for support. Well, maybe not many. I don't know how many, but some people have reported that all of a sudden our servers were getting compromised after we contacted cPanel for support. And it was because they had to provide their root credentials to cPanel, and then cPanel server got hacked, and those credentials got leaked to someone else.
Oh my gosh. Talk about like that's a bad day,
Yes.
And you just don't, as an admin, you just don't see that one coming.
Yeah. And the correlation between people who contacted cPanel support and who all of a sudden had their servers being compromised, that correlation may be how cPanel determined that they had been compromised and started their investigation in the first place, or they noticed something else, or they were just following the Sshd Rootkit thing. It's not clear, but. The news story said that cPanel was going to post a blog about it 2 or 3 days ago, but they have not yet. So
yeah, they say the spokesperson informed cPanel plans on publishing a blog post containing details about the compromise tomorrow, and this was on the 26th. So yeah. Womp womp. All right, Alan. Well, that was interesting.
But yeah, so that's just this extra double important thing you have to look at
Yeah.
when you're thinking about help desk is that how sensitive is the information in your help desk? Because in the case of cPanel, it was extremely sensitive.
It's kind of funny too because I think help desk always kind of has this lower rung priority in just the the mindset.
Yeah, normally you would consider, it doesn't have anything useful in it. But, we've had cases of customers not being very smart and sending their credit card number as part of a billing inquiry.
Yes.
It's like, you just put that in an email.
Yeah.
How about not doing that, please?
Reply back and say, can I get your social too?
It's like, we have a secure credit card entry form on our website that's 56-bit encrypted. You're supposed to use that because it also, does PKI and encrypts your credit card.
Wow.
So it's not stored in plain text on our system, unlike an email.
Any other thoughts on that one, Alan?
No.
No? All right. Well, why don't we take a moment and thank our sponsor, GoDaddy.com. Talk about not wanting to have to worry about things like cPanel vulnerabilities and Sshd Rootkits. This is a deal for you. Brand new month, and we got a brand new deal. This will expire at the end of March, so we're just kicking it off today, even though it's technically still February. But check this out. Economy web hosting for a year, just $1 a month. $1 a month.
How do you get any cheaper than that?
I don't think you actually can. I mean, I think they must be even eating it on the credit card processing at that point. But this is crazy. And what I think of this is I think this is an awesome opportunity. If there has been something you've been kicking around that you want to throw up on the public web, or if you listen to this show and you hear Alan and I say all the time, we don't really recommend running websites and mail servers and things like that in your house on your own ISP's connection. This is an opportunity to put it out there on a professional grade server with GoDaddy. Go over to GoDaddy.com and use our special code HOSTDEAL4 when you check out to get hosting for the economy package for an entire year at just $1 a month. HostDeal4 over at GoDaddy.com. We've also got a 35% off offer. Maybe if you're doing some renewals or something like that, use our code GO35OFF4. Go35OFF4 gets you 35% off your entire order. So if you're getting some certs, you're getting some renewals, whatever you might be doing, 35% off is still a pretty great offer. I really love the codes they're giving us recently. And so, I mean, these are just some of the best deals you're going to find. So that's Go35OFF4 to get 35% off your entire order. But don't forget that nice hosting deal, HostDeal4. HostDeal4 to get $1 a month hosting. Thank you to GoDaddy for the long-time support of the TechSNAP program. I mean, as we approach episode 100, I'm really thankful for a lot of the things that we've had during this journey, and GoDaddy has been a key part of the success of the show. So thank you to them. Thank you to everybody who visits those links in our show notes just to let them know you're paying attention and to check out their site. And seriously, go use those promo codes. We'll have them listed in the show notes, too, if you miss them or you want to send them to somebody or something like that. So it's a great way to support the show, and thank you to GoDaddy for rocking the long-time support. All right, Alan, now this next story definitely made me raise my eyebrow just like this. See, I got this eyebrow, and it just went way, way up. When I heard that one of the guys behind the RSA algorithm, I guess?
Yeah, the almost not quite the concept of public key encryption.
And he's not like the guy, but he's like one of the guys. He said we're in a post-cryptography world.
Well, more we have to get ready for
prepare yourself. Yeah. So tell me about this.
Yeah, so... Eddie Shamir, who's the S in RSA, says that we need to start preparing to be living in a post-cryptography world. And what he means by this is that, well, we'll get to that in a second. So he was speaking at the RSA conference in San Francisco. Yeah. He was part of a panel. Eddie Shamir works at the Weizmann Institute for Science in Israel. But he was speaking about the failure of traditional security systems in the face of these all the news we've been seeing recently is like locking computers in a room, even those computers getting compromised, right? Or we saw the centrifuges at the plant in Iran that were attacked by Stuxnet. They weren't even on the internet, and they still managed to be attacked.
By the way, interesting update about that story in the roundup. Yeah.
But all these traditional concepts we had about how to secure your system are proving not necessarily true.
Or at least not effective enough, yeah.
Yeah, and the old plan was that virus scanners and intrusion detection systems would stop us from getting viruses or detect the viruses once we got them. But now we've seen that places end up with having these advanced persistent threats attacking them for months before they find out about it.
Right.
Or years sometimes. And they find out about it by accident or something. So these are not stopping these advanced persistent threat attacks. And his most important quote here is, "It's very hard to use cryptography effectively if you assume that an APT is watching everything on a system."
Advanced persistent threat.
Yeah. So, you can, if your hard drive's encrypted, that stops someone who steals your laptop from accessing it. But if the person is running an APT malware on your laptop while it's booted, while your hard drive is, accessible by you in decrypted form, then the encryption is useless.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And when you get in and you run as the user's credentials, especially in something like
or if you can steal the key.
Yeah.
If you're able to either keylog the password as they type it in, or steal the key material, or if you've compromised the system.
The two most common, like the Windows encryption system and the most common Linux encryption system, just use once you're logged in as a user session, the files start to decrypt.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot.
Yeah. And so in that case, the cryptography is not the answer to this problem, right? You can store all your files encrypted, but if the advanced persistent threat can get in there as if it was an authorized user and have access to the decrypted material, then it's not really helping.
Yeah, but it almost sounds like an argument not to encrypt at all.
Well, no, you're just saying that we can't rely only on cryptography anymore.
Okay. I mean, I can buy that. I mean, that makes total sense.
So the panel also included a number of other important people, like Ron Rivest from MAT. He's the R in RSA, and also done a bunch of other things. Whitfield Diffie from ICANN. He's one of the guys. He's Diffie-Hellman-Merkle key exchange algorithm used in SSH and a bunch of other things, including some versions of TLS. That was him. Also, Dan Bonet from Stanford University and Ari Jules from RSA Labs were on the panel there.
It seems like such a major problem that almost sometimes gets, I don't know. So here, let me read this. So Shamar he goes on to say that I definitely believe that cryptography is becoming less important. In effect, even the most secure computer systems in the most isolated locations have been penetrated over the last couple of years by a series of APTs and other advanced attacks. And then, he goes on to mention what you said about the cryptography. But there's a lot of components from these I don't want to say it's fear-mongering, but it almost seems a little disingenuous, because really one of the most persistent threats we have is the fact that there's this black market for these vulnerabilities that encourages keeping these vulnerabilities secret and not disclosing them for the public interest to secure our system. So, and part of this industry is being funded by states. So we have private espionage companies that are funding for guys for these exploits, when we have state-backed governments that are funding these guys for these exploits, and that's
buying them from the other people.
Yeah, and that's really what's driving like the attack. What they would call, that's what's exposing the most attacks is right there. Is all these 0 days.
The main way into a lot of these systems is through spear phishing, right? The people are still the weakest link in most of these systems.
Yeah.
You have the 0-day exploit, but you still have to email it to somebody and get them to open the Excel doc.
Yeah.
Or something.
I feel like we need to have I feel like there needs to be a big dialogue about the like a holistic fix, like sysadmin training all the way up to user training and all this stuff. But we're kind of just saying, we have these boogeymen that are. I feel like we're almost playing the boogeyman card a little bit too much. I'm not saying he's doing that, but do you think maybe they're sitting up there at the top of an industry and they're kind of see their industry about to blow up at a whole new level, and they're kind of nudging it along a little bit? Or do you think?
I'm not sure.
Or do you think he's just totally...
Rivest's comments kind of agree with you on part of it, but it reminds me of the XKCD comic where the guy's got, his super secure GPG key or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's going to protect all of his stuff, even from the NSA, but it's going to be defeated by a $5 wrench that they're going to smash his fingers with until he tells them the password.
Yeah, totally true. Yeah.
Right? So, it comes down to, you have to do what you can to protect your systems against certain attacks, and there's some that maybe, at a certain level you're not as worried about.
And I guess we should encourage people to always operate under the assumption that security is this multiple layer approach where you have to assume there's vulnerabilities in your infrastructure.
And every layer, so you have to use
And design
defense in
around
depth.
that. Defense in depth, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's
And-
where the conversation needs to be leading. Maybe he's just trying to kick that off with this.
Partly. And I think the other problem is that too often we've chose convenience over security.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Look at
being able
password resets, right? What's your mother's maiden name? I mean, that's atrocious.
Yes.
Or your high school, right? I mean, that can be Googled.
Yeah, and but also things like why do we ever need to be able to embed a Flash file into an Excel document?
Right.
And things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you kind of say it as a joke, but some of the most advanced attacks in history now have been through ridiculous entry points like a Flash file in an Excel spreadsheet, and all you have to do is email one secretary with that attached, and you've got it.
Yep. And it's all about the spear phishing, right? Making it not look like your regular attack, but make it look like an invite to a conference, right? Remember we saw the one that was a PDF file,
right?
And it was all mocked up, and it was like purposely targeting the people in the industry that would go to this conference. And when they opened the PDF file about the conference, they would get compromised. Mm-hmm. And the conference in question was defense contractors or something.
Yeah, and I've seen one where it's like, here's that bid we talked about. I've revised the proposal. I think this should, all this, like, try to get you to open the PDF to look at, like, I was accidentally sent somebody's bid. Now I'm going to get to peek in on what they were going to do. And,
or
you're
last week we covered some genius was sending out fake copies of the Mandiant report. Right? It's like, here, APT1, except for you open the PDF file and it wasn't.
Yes, that's pretty brilliant. That is pretty brilliant.
That's what we call trend jacking, right? Jumping on this way that people, meaning to read that. But instead of going to the proper website and getting it, you're going to open it from your email from some random guy in Japan.
I don't mean to trend jack, Alan, but I do have something about episode 100, unless there's anything else you have on
There's one more point here.
Okay.
So Rivas was also talking about the problems with the current PKI system, specifically certificate authorities. In light of the compromise of Komodo and DigiNotar last year.
Yeah.
As well as more recent problems like Turk Trust, the Turkish certificate authority, who was found to give out subordinate certificates to two different parties, one of them a government contractor for the government of Turkey, who then used it to create fake Google certificates. Mm-hmm. So the certificates were valid, right? They were trusted by everybody's browser, but they were issued to a government contractor for the domains of Google and Gmail. Mm-hmm. And they shouldn't have been. So Rivas suggests a new system that has more tolerance for failures and compromises, but also where users have more control over whom they decide to trust. Right? Because right now, you'd have to dig into every browser at your company and choose to disable support for the Turkish CA or something. Mm-hmm. Right? There's not really this level of deciding. It's like the browser decides who you trust, not you.
Right.
Now, if we put too much of the onus on the users, nobody's going to trust any. Like if the default is not to trust very much, then users are going to have problems, or is basically going to concentrate the market to a smaller number of CAs, which might be the wrong way to go.
Mm-hmm. That's a tricky thing to do, especially in the political business climate of today. These systems that were invented back then, there weren't a lot of these influences that we have now.
Well, and especially in light of a growing trend where governments are pressuring CAs to fail or behave strangely or issue certificates that they shouldn't. Right?
Yeah, that's kind of,
It comes down to, the browsers have come up with this system of, they have the certificate working group or whatever, where they set out the rules for the new version of the EV SSL certificates. We talked about that at 30 episodes ago or something. And they set out all these rules, and you can only issue these green bar certificates if you meet all these rules, and if you don't, we'll revoke it. And it comes down to are there rules in there about if the government comes to the CA and forces them to do something, how does the CA revoke trust in itself? Or the government wouldn't look kindly if the CA went and wrote to Mozilla and be like, hey, you should untrust us because the government's making us do stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So how do we detect when the governments are tampering with CAs like this? And how do we punish the CA when they're tampered with by their government?
Yeah, and if you're,
because if we just, if, say, the U.S. government went to Symantec, which bought VeriSign,
right,
and took them over, or bought the CA's business from VeriSign. VeriSign is still its own separate thing. If all of a sudden some big U.S. certificate issuer was forced by the U.S. government to sign a certificate for Google or something, if Mozilla revoked trust in them, that would break a lot of businesses' websites, right? That everybody would get the SSL warnings when they tried to access them.
Right.
And that's why, when we saw when Komodo was compromised, rather than revoking trust in Komodo, like they ended up doing with DigiNotar, they just blacklisted those specific certificates. But that had to be done in kind of a hackish way because there was no system for that worked properly, right? Because the certificate revocation lists aren't checked, aren't implemented quite how they're supposed to be. And so it raises a lot of questions about, at what point are you punishing the CA and what point are you punishing the customers of the CA? And how do we stop governments from interfering with certificate authorities?
Boy, I guess the only thing we can do is just continue to follow and see what happens.
Yeah.
Not, it's all, if anything does happen, it'll all be early days.
But, originally the idea with PKO was this web of trust.
Right.
But right now we have this hierarchy of trust instead. And it comes, but
it makes sense we have to revisit some of these ideas.
Yeah, well, because like GPG's never really, or PGP has never really gotten to take off because the web of trust has never been big enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? There is no key for everyone and things like that.
Right. That was a great little stroll down RSA Lane, thanks to this little conference they put together. So we have a link to that in the show notes. Chat room was also mentioning Moxie. Moxie has a great talk on YouTube. So
yes,
at Black Hat,
we talked about we used his articles in the original talk about Komodo and stuff, and some of his suggestions. Yeah. I'm guessing he's probably fleshed them out a little bit more, but
so anyways. Very good, Alan. Very good. Well, before we jump into the feedback, I want to let everybody know that you've got 5 days and 5 hours from this very moment that we're recording to purchase yourself a limited time edition TechSNAP 100. We're at 497 purchases. It'd be really cool if we got over 500. I think we could do it. I think it's close though.
I don't know. Past 500 already.
Oh, did we on my screen? You know what? Maybe I'll refresh. Alan. Let's roll the drum roll, please. Boom! 500 right there, Alan. There it is. 500 TechSNAP 100 limited edition t-shirts. All right, let's do 600 now. Just kidding.
Only 5 days left.
Yeah, 5 days left now. See, so by the time we're recording episode 100 next week, this is going to be wrapped up. But we kind of figured that way you guys would get them shipped out to you as close to episode 100 as we could, but still give you enough time to buy them. So we tried to hit a sweet spot there. So they're $13.37. We'll have a link in the show notes. It's been a lot of fun to do this. And Al and I have heard from a couple of people that they didn't even realize that the SNAP part of TechSNAP stood for Systems Network and Administration Podcast until they looked at the back of the t-shirt. So they don't listen to the intro. That's fine. I say it every intro, but that's okay. That's all right. I don't mind as long as you
enjoy
a lot
of
the
time
shirt.
coming up with the name for that. Come on.
Yeah. All right. So anyways, limited time edition shirt, 5 days left, and thank you to everybody who's grabbed that. That's been a ton of fun. I got myself a couple too because I wanted one to wear, and then when I inevitably stain that one, I want to have one that I can then stain at a later point. So that's why I got two. All right. I don't use Java. That'd be a good shirt in the future. But right now, I don't know. Right now, we're just doing this shirt, but it's been a lot of fun. All right, Alan. With all the news done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at JupiterBroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, or heck, starting a thread over in our subreddit at links.techsnap.tv. Mr. Allen, are you ready for our first email this week?
Sure.
All right, it comes in from Indigo, and he says, hey, Chris and Allen, recently I set up a FreeBSD box at my house, and I have TeamSpeak 3 and SSH servers running on there, among a few other things. I was looking for some resources where I could learn more about network administration and security, potentially as a possible career choice, as I'm still in high school. Thanks a bunch. Now, this is an interesting theme. We have another email that kind of matches this. Why don't I read that right now just real quick? Because I think these kind of line up. Matt, my co-host on the Linux Action Show, wrote in. He said, hey, guys, I had an interesting Skype call today with a young person, soon to be a graduate from college, who is seeking a career in network administration. He's been acing school and he's ready to get his hands dirty. Problem is, he's working 40 plus hours per week so he can pay his bills and isn't able to find opportunities for getting his foot in the door to learn some hands-on stuff. I thought this would be an awesome thing to cover on TechSNAP, as more and more there's probably kids out there that are coming out of school that need some mentorship and getting experience. I figure learning is an obvious one, but with students who have ever-changing work schedules, how would they fulfill internships and craziness like that? And I don't think this applies just to students. You think about maybe guys that are in a certain field of work or gals that kind of just want to transition to a different field. What are resources people could go sort of self-start? And let's start maybe with FreeBSD and then just kind of toss in a few other suggestions from there. So if I was going to self-train on FreeBSD, where would you tell me to go?
Well, there's the handbook that's got a lot of information. It's quite useful. Also, the wiki has a lot of the more stuff that's kind of
changing.
Yeah, it's like under construction type stuff.
Yeah.
Hopefully, the docs will get even better shortly. There's a doc sprint at BSDCan this year. I think they have one every year, but the idea is that a bunch of the people that write docs are getting together each evening over the weekend to work on updating the docs more and finding out new docs and so on.
That's awesome.
I'm planning to spend some time doing that.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, so in addition to the handbook and all the resources on the FreeBSD website, and their forum is quite useful for questions and stuff, there's also the bsdcertification.org. They have a study guide for studying for the certification, and it covers the stuff most people want to know, like installing the OS, securing it, dealing with ports and packages, adding users, managing groups and permissions, and upgrading and all the kind of stuff, the basic sysadmin stuff is what's covered by the certification, but their study guide is very useful even if you're not planning to take the cert.
Okay, so that's probably one way to kind of follow an official track. There's also, there's the I don't know whether they're on Freenode, but there's the FreeBSD IRC where you could probably ask questions, and then
I'm in there quite a bit.
And where is that at? What server is that on? Is that on
Freenode? Yep.
Freenode. Okay. And then I don't know if I've spent much time in the FreeBSD Reddit community, but I know that they have a semi-active community over there where they have announcements and like help threads. You can always check that out. And YouTube videos and things like that. I think, the question of just the overall theme here is how do I learn while I'm still doing what I need to do, my day-to-day jobs. This might be a cop-out answer. I don't know. What do you think, Alan? I often say get involved in a community that needs somebody to fill that role. Like, so Jupiter Broadcasting often has, spots in the community where people will offer to help out, and they sort of begin to own that part of the community, and they get on-the-job training. Now, I can't afford to pay them, but, that's one way. Or open source projects. You can find an open source project that you respect or really like or use or have watched and offer, hey, can I admin something for you? Can I admin the website? Can I help host this? Blah, blah, blah. Or, hey, I'd like to suggest maybe you run this. Things like that might be one way to sort of get free over-the-internet training. What about like internships and things like that? Have you ever had people come to you and say, hey, I want to intern for Scale Engine?
Once or twice, but I don't have the resources to deal with
train
that.
Yeah. That's a challenge too. The only way to really, get over that hurdle.
I don't know. The way I learned everything was just doing it. Like, it's like I needed. Like, I didn't set out to learn PHP necessarily. I set out
to solve a problem.
Yeah, this customer wanted to build a online catalog of all the stuff out of their text catalog. You couldn't. It wasn't an e-commerce website. You could just shop around, get the part numbers, and then phone them. Right, so it wasn't a whole e-commerce system, but it was just a way to browse an online version of their catalog. Mm-hmm. I had never used PHP or SQL before that, but I learned them and did it. It was done very poorly, but it was the base, and it got me started.
Yeah, and like Matt High 19 in the chat room has pointed out, YouTube really isn't a bad place either. And Sword Saint, great recommendation. Play with VMs, break something in a VM. And I think Alan's really nailed it. If you really want to learn it, in my experience, you need to be scratching an itch. You need to be solving a problem. And the motivation to solve that problem will force you to get from point A to point B and learn everything you need to learn in that path to accomplish that goal. It has to be something kind of big. That's why I kind of say maybe join an open source project, something like that. That way you sort of have some peer pressure too. But if you have something you've wanted to do it and use that as a learning opportunity. And then, put it on a resume. Just some of that's about how you phrase things too. If you set something up for somebody or you built something, put that in a positive light and then use that as a stepping stone to get that internship or to get a part-time job. It's a little more difficult when you're working 40 hours a week. That's why I would say try to find something you can do online.
Yep. But yeah, my ability to do that mostly just came from my personal
drive to learn.
Yeah, well, not so much that is solve problems. Like if I'm working on a problem, I don't give up very easily.
You're right.
I can't sleep until I've solved the problem, and so I just keep pounding on it. And if that ends up coming with a solution, then great.
Right. All right. Well, let's go to the next question that I've actually wondered myself sometimes, Alan. It comes in from I'm going to say Gargan. I'm not sure. Gregan. He says, what's so bad about double NAT? I hear a lot of bad things about double NAT or even triple NAT. Well, if it's so screwy and problematic, how come I have VMs that do it all the time? Shouldn't VMs come with a giant warning sticker that natting may cause random issues? Or is there natting different of some kind? By the way, I'm aware that all VM platforms support external address for the networks. I'm just pointing this out.
It's not that double natting is overly bad. It's just it's never better than one level of NAT. Basically, if you have 3 levels, then if you want to forward a port through, you have to do it in all 3 places. If you want, and there's, a timeout or a reset in any one of those 3 levels can break your connection. Basically, it's just inefficient. It's not necessarily inherently bad. It's just something you should want to avoid.
Yeah.
If you can use the natting in your VM, and that's fine, although if you bridge to your regular LAN and then have it natted via your regular router, that has advantages too, including allowing other machines on your LAN to access that VM, if that's what you want. Sometimes you want to isolate it, or host only or NAT. There's nothing stopping you from having 10 layers of NAT. It just would be a really stupid thing to do.
Right, and let alone just for performance purposes. Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. But like he points out, the way that's working is the virtual host is acting as a router for those machines that are running on virtual networks in the VM. All right, next email comes from Simon, and Simon writes, this question is about intermediate SSL certificates. And he says, for years, I've been setting up websites with SSL and ignoring the intermediate certificate the SSL provider emails me. I've never had a problem until recently when I went with a new provider, and the SSL came up as invalid on my Chrome for Android phone, yet still valid on Chrome for Ubuntu. After setting up the intermediate certificate for this domain, SSL worked on both devices. What are intermediate SSLs, and how come I've never needed them until now, and why are they only needed on certain browsers? Thanks for such a great show. Keep up the great work.
Right. So an intermediate certificate is, say you're a root CA, like Komodo, or maybe a bad example, VeriSign, whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes, rather than issuing every certificate from your root certificate, you'll create what's called a subordinate certificate, or an intermediate certificate. For example, Komodo's been doing this on purpose, because they have a reseller program and stuff, and breaking it down so that each one of those is an intermediate certificate, so that in the future they could revoke all of anything signed by a certain intermediate certificate without affecting ones issued by other certificates. Anyway, yes, it's like a lot of these places basically are selling someone else's, there were only so many root CAs, it's really hard to get a new one accepted by all the browsers.
Right.
Because even if it was, there's a long time where older machines aren't going to support your certificate. So we create these intermediate certificates, right? You're saying, your certificate comes from company B, which got their certificate from company A. Some of those intermediate certificates are in part of the browser. Like they end up getting trusted as if they were a root. So that's why you don't always need them. But
and so, like in the case of Chrome on the desktop, it might have had one pre-installed.
The big bundle where they have, a lot of the popular intermediate CAs are pre-installed in the bundle.
And on a desktop browser, they're more likely to load it up than on a mobile browser.
Yeah, on the mobile browser, we need to save space and load time, so we're not going to install this intermediate CA.
Yeah.
So you should always have the intermediate CA. Just because it works for you doesn't mean it's going to work for someone with an older browser or a different implementation or a different operating system.
GoDaddy actually has a really great brief explanation right here. They say the intermediate certificate bundle chains your SSL certificate to our trusted root certificates, letting your certificate secure connections with older browsers that might only have our original ValiCert root certificate installed. So that's the other thing, too, is sometimes older browsers have older root certificates. So.
Yep.
Very good question, though. A very good question. All right. Now, this one, it was just sort of some perspective that Ken wanted to send in, because a lot of times on the show we talk about these SCADA systems and we say, why are these incredibly vulnerable systems designed from the 80s connected to the internet in the first place? If you don't want hackers to be able to shut down pumps and valves, maybe you shouldn't connect them to the internet. Well, Ken writes and he says, in reference to TechSNAP 97, where they had the hacked EAS box in Montana, due to new federal guidelines from FEMA, all EAS boxes have to pull from an IP AWS server housed at FEMA so they can trigger mass alerts. And by the way, side note, they run Linux.
Right.
So protocol sort of mandates they be connected. That way they can monitor them and control them.
Connected to the internet is one thing. Accessible from the internet is another.
Right.
If it needs to be able to connect out to pull from a FEMA website, you can do that without allowing any connections from outside to get to that server.
Yeah, good point.
Like that, you don't even have to have a firewall for that. All you need is NAT with no ports forwarded.
Well, and, don't put it on the public net.
A $10 freaking Linksys router would have protected the system in that case.
I still don't understand even then why it has to be on the public net.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Jude. Well, I want to remind folks that since we are recording 2 episodes next week, back-to-back, 100 and 101, because Alan's going to be at BSDCan, right?
Asia BSDCon.
Right, that's what it was. And so we're going to pre-record 1 episode. That means we need extra emails. So email us techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or hit that contact link right at the top of our website or start a thread in our subreddit. We troll on that, trying to get some extra stuff too. That way we have a little extra padding so we can shoot 2 episodes back-to-back. So now's a great chance if you had a question you've been wanting to ask us, something about sysadmin, something about security, something about basics, whatever it might be, go ahead, send it in, and we'll try to get it here on the show. And we'll have it for 100 and 101. And then you'll make it one of our... I wish we called those. We need like a name, like not Hallmark episodes, but like, I don't know. We'll come up with something clever. Because,
Epic episode.
Epics, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, okay. All right, well, since that's all the feedback, I think that means, Alan, I mean, I'm just guessing, but I'd say that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup! Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite make it to the top of the show, but we still wanted to talk about them, maybe give you a few links to follow up on your own after the show. And a lot of these links are supplied by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. All right, Alan. Our first Roundup story this week kind of made me grin a little bit, and it is yours, so I'll toss it to you. What is our first Roundup story?
It's not mine, it's yours, but anyway.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay.
It's from a TED Talk. Sergey Brin says that using a smartphone makes him feel like a girl.
I put this in here?
No, I did.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see.
The ones in blue are mine.
No, I see what you're saying.
We have a whole system, but anyway.
I just meant that you put the story in the Sorry. Yeah, right. So this is so funny. Of course, now he's promoting glass, right?
Yes.
But you want to, and he says that touching the glass of an inanimate object is emasculating. But somehow wearing a funky-looking pair of glasses on your head isn't. But the thing that I think is emasculating about smartphones is silly names like Jelly Bean and those gingerbread. I think that is the only emasculating part about smartphones, if you ask me.
Possibly.
That's all you had? You just wanted to poke a little fun at him? All right.
Yeah, well, it was news. It's more talking about a bunch of other things. But yeah, it was...
All right, Alan. Then our next story in the roundup, which is actually your story, an HTML5 bug in all major browsers except Firefox?
Yeah, well, if it's my story, why are you reading it? But
well, set it up for you.
We normally take turns. Anyway, it's like 99 episodes, and you forgot how to do any of it.
I'm throwing you off, Al.
So basically, HTML5 includes this system called local storage, which allows the websites to store data on your computer.
Right.
Normally, cookies were limited to 4 kilobytes, whereas this allows like 5 megabytes and more in that range. And all browsers implement a limit on this. I think Chrome is 2.5 megs and Safari is 5 megs and IE is 10 megs or something like that. The problem is that they don't have an overall limit or an affiliated sites limit. So this guy made a domain called like phildisk.com and used domains 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all these numbers .phildisk.com, and basically keeps filling up your local storage until your hard drive is full. Or Chrome seems to crash before the hard drive gets full.
Oh, good.
So the only browser not affected by this is Firefox, which implements the standard correctly and limits affiliated sites.
Good job, Firefox. Look at them go.
To me, it seems like there should also be a global limit on all the local storage. Just like how you have a cache, you set a limit and such.
Right.
I think it comes down to...
It's interesting they just implemented this feature and never even exposed that as an option to the user.
Which feature, though? What do you mean?
It's being able to set that yourself. Like you mentioned, you can set the cache size for your web cache.
Right.
Why can't there be a preference
I don't know
dialog?
if you can, if there's a preference to change the max size
I don't think so.
for HTTP local storage. But yeah, eventually it should obviously have a setting per site, so I can allow a certain site to store more data.
Maybe
and
like
things
the
like
about
that.
config you can or something.
Yeah, but a nicer user interface for managing that would be good.
Mm-hmm.
And in the comments there, some people suggested doing things like, when a site tries to store a lot of data, maybe a prompt to the users like, the site is storing a lot. Do you want to give it more space or not, and things like that.
Right. Interesting. All right. Next story in the roundup. So after we covered the Facebook and Apple watering hole attack where they were browsing like iPhoneSDK.com and got infected by that Java exploit, Microsoft comes out and says, yeah, kind of the same thing, affected a few machines in our Mac business unit. We didn't say anything because that's just not how our policy works, but now that our investigation's over, we're kind of embarrassed. They go on to say that that this type of cyber attack is just beginning to escalate more and more, and that Microsoft is going to try to position the company to help defend companies from this kind of thing.
Yep.
So there you go. Everybody, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, they all got big. Guess there's a lot of iPhone development going on out there in the world.
Something like that.
All right, this next story is crazy, and I won't even say what it's about because it's all yours.
The chief financial officer of Time Warner says that apparently no one wants gigabit internet at home as far as they're concerned.
Ridiculous. I don't.
Basically,
just
they were
kinda want
asked.
it.
Yeah, they were asked, how they plan to compete with Google's fiber offering, and they're like, nobody wants that.
Oh,
It's like,
that's why they said that.
there's not, the comment on Slashdot was like, that sounds like an Apple answer. It's like, oh, people don't want that until we
Right.
offer it, then everybody wants it.
People don't want videos on their iPod. People don't want books on their iPod. Oh, by the way, here's a widescreen iPod that plays video.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, and people are moving to Kansas to get Google Fiber. Businesses are opening there to use Google Fiber. So do not tell me people do not want Google Fiber. Do not tell me that, because that is not true. They are lying, Time Warner. Time Warner is lying. All right, the next story, building a paid app for Firefox OS from the Mozilla blog. This is I believe, is sort of like, saying hello to developers and saying, look, we're going to have paid apps.
Yep.
They say that on the Firefox OS phone, it enables you to sell a web app that will run on any open web device by way of recipient of the protocol. So think like the Chrome Web Store, but maybe a different take on it. You know how Chrome has that marketplace for web
right,
apps?
but the idea here is that when you buy an app, there's a receipt protocol. And the idea is that the store would be device agnostic.
Right.
So it's a system where you can prove that you paid for an app.
Right.
Such that maybe, if you had a Firefox OS phone and an Android tablet and some other device, that you could get the app on all the devices with only having to pay for it once.
I think I like that idea.
Yes.
And I like that it's Mozilla that's behind it. So,
yeah.
But
basically, the receipt protocol is this open source separate project, and the idea is that if everybody can support this, then we can make a way that, obviously Apple is a vested interest in making sure that you buy everything from the Apple Store.
Right.
But if there's some system where you can redeem a receipt at the Apple Store to get your app through the Apple Store, but having paid for it previously or something.
Well, I mean, if it's a web app, you just use Safari. As long as unless they needed something implemented in Safari to support it, then they wouldn't be able to do it. Right. Like if there was some sort of standard that had to be in the browser engine or something.
But I don't think there is, so we'll have to see.
Huh. Wow, that could be pretty cool. Yep. All right, well, this next story, whose is this one, the Semantic story, Alan? You tell me. I've got a highlight here. I could read a few excerpts from it because I thought this was fascinating. Semantic finds older versions of Stuxnet dating all the way back to 2005. Semantic Security has recently analyzed a sample of Stuxnet that predates version 1.001 they had seen in the past. According to a blog post, they said in analysis of this code, it reveals the latest discovery to be version 0.5 and that it was in operation between 2007 and 2009, with indications that even earlier variants of it were in operation as early as 2005. After a painstaking analysis, they can now confirm that 417 PLC device attack code modifiers modify the state of the valves used to feed the UF6, that's the uranium hexafluoride gas, into the uranium enrichment centrifuges, according to Symantec. So they've actually got it down to how many PLCs were actually impacted by this and kind of how it did it, like the actual valves that it modified to change the way that the amount of, I guess, hexafluoride gas was fed into the enrichment centrifuge, which is incredible. They've gotten it down to that level. Boy, Stuxnet was really quite a thing, and it shows you how long the U.S. and Israel were working on it. They've been working on it since 2005. What's interesting, too, is in the first earlier versions, it used part of the Flame malware, yep. And then they, in the later iterations, according to Symantec, like around the 2007 timeline, they swapped out that Flamer stuff and put in new stuff that was even more aggressive, and that was really when things started to kick up. So fascinating stuff.
Yep.
All right, now we have a story about Chrome 25.
Yes, so Google released version 25 of Chrome, which fixes 9 critical vulnerabilities. So you want to make sure you get the newest version of Chrome.
Ooh, they've also implemented some new fancy features in there too. So,
yep.
So it looks like, and I think Chrome just auto updates. So just check it if you haven't got updated. You can go download it. All right, this one is just driving me crazy. Probably a lot of you heard about the 6 strikes rule that a lot of ISPs voluntarily went into collusion. Decided to implement. And Torrent Freak has a little update on that, on how Comcast plans to punish BitTorrent pirates. And they're going to use a little browser hijacking to do it. A pop-up notification will come up with a alert /educational banner to inform the user about the fact that they are violating the 6 strikes rule, and that if they don't cooperate, they'll get added to a blacklist that these major ISPs share. In common with other ISPs, Comcast will start out with friendly alerts. At first, they'll just inform you that this account's being used to copyright material, and you should probably simmer down. They're also going to send you an email. But then after 4 more repeated warnings, they're going to enter you into what they're going to call a mitigation phase, where you might actually begin to see service disruptions, and they will send you a physical letter. And the thing that here's Torrent Freak has a little screenshot of it. The thing that scares me is a lot of people, they have their machine taken over, and it gets used to do stuff that they had no idea somebody was on there doing. And it gets tracked back to their IP, and I do not agree with using IPs as a sole identifier for activity that happened at somebody's house. I mean, it could have been a hijacked machine doing it for all they know.
And, IPs are not that static. They're quite transient.
Right. And do they start with copyrighted material and then later say, hey, we saw some suspicious IRC activity, we saw some suspicious scanning, so you're going to get added to the alert system? It's just a slippery
Well, and
slope.
also, the fact that they're just working with the movie industry with no legal mandate at all. And,
Right. It's like,
but also just the browser hijacking, injecting anything into, it's like net neutrality rules should be specific about, you can't adulter my internet connection in any way.
It's offensive on several levels.
Well, yeah, it's like, we talked about it the other week when it was, I forget which ISP was doing a browser hijack to tell you their email was down. Remember that a couple weeks ago?
Yes. Which is just, and you make a good point that it's big content that's working with big ISPs, and
well, not only that, is part of it is the fact that the ISPs are owned by big content.
Yeah,
like Comcast owns NBC and Universal, which is movies.
There has
Time
been,
Warner is Warner Brothers and so on.
I mean, I suppose I support this more than I would prefer something like, I would not prefer SOPA, for example, to have gone into effect instead of them doing this, although that could still happen. And the thing that's been sort of disappointing for me as a citizen is there has been zero coverage on the mainstream media, because the same companies that own the ISPs own CNN and own Fox News and they own MSN. They own all of the guys. They all get owned by the same people.
Comcast owns NBC.
Yeah, so they're not talking about the fact that this service that everybody uses now, especially people who are in the modern age and in business, I mean, it's really big deal. Nobody's really talking about it at all. It's just disappointing. Disappointing. All right, speaking of disappointing, Java disappoints. That was me throwing it to you for Java,
Yes.
the Java story.
So Security Explorations, the Polish firm that's found the 55th vulnerability in Java recently. Basically, they found 2 more vulnerabilities. They heard back from Oracle about the 54th one, and Oracle said, no, it's supposed to do that. And so they sent back more details being like, no, you misunderstand. It's doing this, which is definitely not supposed to do. But anyway, even if you have update 15, there are at least 2 known vulnerabilities to that now, although they're not currently being exploited in the wild because the only people that know about them are the Polish firm and Oracle.
Now, speaking of the 6 strikes and you're out, and things aren't so great across the pond either. Court orders UK ISPs to block more piracy sites. And we've actually talked a little bit about this before on the TechSNAP program. The High Court has ordered the UK major internet service providers to block 3 websites offering links to pirated material. Now, remember we covered a story where it was the same kind of thing. They just handed them a little list and said, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and ask you to block all of these from all of your customers. And it's... Who decides? The High Court decides? Well, what are they basing that decision on?
Exactly.
So, anyways, data seen by the BBC suggested that blocking the Pirate Bay had only a short-term effect on the level of piracy online. In fact, in some cases, they've seen an increase in traffic now because people became more aware of it.
Yeah.
All right, so the next story is a Bitcoin story. Remember the old Bitcoin Blaster segment?
No, there's one more story first. So Adobe has pushed yet another Flash update, fixing 2 critical vulnerabilities that are currently being exploited in the wild. So, like, as soon as we're done talking about Bitcoin and the show's over, you should go update your Flash.
You should go update your Flash. Yeah. All right. See that? Adobe is slipping those vulnerability releases in faster than I can open up in new tabs, Alan. It's crazy.
Well, at least they're fixing them.
Yeah,
quickly, right? Rather than being like, oh, you can wait a couple of months,
right?
Like Oracle.
Now, yeah. I guess I can't complain. All right. Well, so Bitcoin reached $33. So one Bitcoin is worth $33. It's an all-time trading high, and I think it peaked at $33.22. Let's see, what's it at right now? So you sold your Bitcoins, didn't you?
You
made a tiny little profit too.
I had forgotten that I had any left until about a week ago when someone mentioned that there was like $30. And I was like, what?
Yeah,
so I went over to the exchange just to check, and I logged in and was like, oh, hey, I have like 15 Bitcoin sitting here. And I checked my account, and it had a couple more too, so I sold them all.
Wow, Mt. Gox is the exchange rate to USD right now is $33.44. So I remember I got my I had like an online account, and it got hacked, and I lost like half my Bitcoins.
Yeah.
So I now sold half of that half. So I sold half at $30, and I now have half. That half still works out to be like $1,000 or something because the Bitcoin price is so high right now.
Yeah, what makes me sad is when we sold most of our coins when we got rid of our mining box, which would have been August, I think August of last year.
What were they going for?
We got about $6.80.
Oh yeah. Well, I honestly didn't think it'd get back up this high.
Well, yeah,
really.
most people when it was at $30, most people were like, "That's just silly," and it did crash after that. But
and a lot of people thought when it reached $31 or something like that this time, it would crash after that, and it's actually broken that, and it's. I mean, you can look at the charts. It's trending up in all countries except for one.
Things are fairly stable with it now. People have learned what they can and can't trust as far as don't store your Bitcoins with some random dude off IRC.
Yeah. And it's getting some
the difficulty level has gone up, and basically Bitcoins aren't being generated at the same rate anymore.
Right. They're being. It's more of a trading.
The difficulty is much higher. And the reward is halved.
And you did you see that recent?
So this price increase is what is supposed to happen,
right?
Because the number of Bitcoins that are ever going to exist is limited, and then a number that can be created in any period of time is limited. So we know how many new Bitcoins could possibly come out in the next month.
Right, it kind of stabilizes it a bit.
Yeah, that's the whole idea is that once the system is stable, like obviously it had. Lots of speculation and other issues in the beginning.
Yeah.
But once the system works itself out, the idea is that, it'll be a very stable exchange rate. And also you have to consider what the exchange rate versus the other currencies,
WikiLeaks just announced that they've received $80,000 in Bitcoin donations. Archive.org just announced that they're going to start offering payment to some of their employees partially in Bitcoins. You think about people around the world, that they're like like when we pay people around the world, there's a conversion rate that happens and it's clunky. But with Bitcoin, I just send you a coin immediately. You receive it almost instantaneously. Then it's confirmed after a short period of time, and then you can cash it out right there. So, and you can send halves of Bitcoins and all kinds of things. So, I've actually been thinking about using the Bitcoins that I do have as sort of like an experiment to see what I can do with Bitcoin, and then maybe do a segment on it at some point.
Well, I know one of my server providers accepts Bitcoins, and I've always been but I was always tempted to use my leftover Bitcoins to pay them.
Yeah.
And I might have done that if I hadn't sold them.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that now. VPN providers, a lot of different things are coming up and taking Bitcoin.
Right. Well, this was just weird because this particular provider is much higher quality. Like, they're a bigger company. You don't expect them to do it.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah. Because a lot of times it's more of the indie shops that are doing that. So there you go. There for you long-time
because there's
viewers.
definitely, especially before when the prices was so volatile, there's definitely a risk. If they accept your payment of X Bitcoins that are worth $100 today, and tomorrow it's only worth $60, they just lost $40.
Yeah. You got it. Well, then you got it. Yeah.
And so, and if they're doing something where they're only cashing out their Bitcoins once a month or something, then there's quite a...
But it's not...
So some places would overcharge in Bitcoin in order to make up for that uncertainty.
Now, I'm not saying it's the same thing, but it's not necessarily like a new problem, because if somebody took payments in silver or gold, they have that same risk.
Well, no, even if if we took payment in euros instead of US dollars, then we have that same risk.
Right. Yeah.
The relative exchange rate could change.
Absolutely.
And that's why we take everything in US dollars. Like originally, we used to deal with US and Canadian dollars, but now we're like everybody. The few people we have in Canadian, we just take them in Canadian dollar at par, even though the exchange rate is always plus or minus a couple percent. It just simplifies our life so much by just
it's a direct digital payment system.
Yep.
I mean, even if it's not ever going to become super widespread, it almost does seem necessary, because like the internet almost needs its own currency in some form. I'm not saying that it is going to be the internet's currency, but it was something that run by states when the internet is borderless. It doesn't necessarily always make sense. And if there is, just like people buy coins for the favorite video game they play, like Star Trek Online, you can get Zen points and Cartel points and SOTOR. Only these work across the entire internet. Now that would really be the big thing for Bitcoin, is if you could start buying in-game items with Bitcoin in some major game. I think that would really blow it up. But there you go, a little retro what do we call it? Bitcoin
Blaster.
Yeah, for the longtime viewers. All right, Alan, I think that brings us to the end of this week's episode. Don't forget, we have episode 100 next week, and we'll be shooting 101 just after that. We're going to be doing those back-to-back. So please join us live over at jblive.tv at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2100 UTC.
Over at jblive.tv for the video and jblive.info for the audio. Also, I just like to remind you, you can support this show and all of the shows on the Jupiter Broadcasting Network by using our affiliate links at the bottom of our website. And we also have Chrome and Firefox, and soon, very likely, an Opera extension. We have a TechSNAP fan, Alan, who's going to be making us an Opera extension. So we'll give you guys an update about that in the future. But if you grab those extensions before you shop, it'll automatically tag your shopping session at Amazon or Newegg or ThinkGeek or Best Buy or Monoprice, a lot of different ones, and a portion of your shopping session will be contributed to Jupiter Broadcasting. It's a nice way to give something to us without impacting your budget. Just do it while you're doing your regular shopping. All right, Alan. Well, thank you, sir, for a great show. Thank you to the chat room for joining us, and thank you out there for downloading this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.